Picture this. A man walks into a library, slams his hand on the counter and tells the librarian, loud enough for everyone to hear, that he needs a book about conspiracy theories, that the moon landing was fake, that all doctors are liars, and that he has done his own research. The librarian, a woman who has spent 30 years surrounded by the collected knowledge of human civilization, takes one slow breath, looks at him, and says very quietly, "Third shelf on the left, sir." She did not argue. She did not produce evidence. She did not spend 45 minutes of her one precious life trying to rescue a man who arrived with no intention of being rescued. She simply pointed and moved on to the next person. That librarian is the most strategically intelligent person in this story, and most people would not have done what she did. Most people would have argued, because most people have been wired, from school debates to social media comment sections to every family dinner where that one uncle arrives with opinions, to believe that the correct response to a wrong idea is a better argument, that if you just find the right words, the right evidence, the right angle of approach, the fog will lift and the person in front of you will say, "Oh, you are right. I never thought of it that way. Thank you." This has happened to approximately nobody in the history of human conflict. What actually happens is this: you present your evidence, they dismiss it. You find better evidence, they shift the goalposts. You address the new position. They bring up something from 3 years ago that has nothing to do with the current conversation, but somehow invalidates everything you just said. You have now been talking for an hour. You are tired. You are frustrated. You have said the same thing 7 different ways, and it has landed exactly nowhere. And the person across from you looks, if anything, more convinced of their original position than when they arrived. Because you argued with them. And arguing with someone, it turns out, is one of the most reliable ways to make them dig deeper into exactly what you were trying to argue them out of. This is called the backfire effect. It is a documented psychological phenomenon. When people feel their beliefs are being attacked, the brain treats it as a physical threat. And the response to a physical threat is not reconsideration, it is defense. The harder you push, the harder they hold. You are not changing their mind. You are constructing it a fortified bunker and handing them the bricks. Sun Tzu wrote this in The Art of War 2,500 years ago. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. Not the loudest army wins, the smartest one does. The one that understands the terrain, reads the opponent, and finds the path to victory that the opponent never saw coming because they were too busy preparing for a battle that was never going to happen. That is what this video is. A field guide to winning without fighting. 5 strategies used by the sharpest minds in human history to navigate conflict, neutralize difficult people, and come out ahead without ever lowering themselves to the level of an argument they were never going to win anyway. Not because the fight was beneath them, because the win was worth more than the fight. And the two things are not the same. If you have ever walked away from an argument feeling like you won the debate and lost the day, comment below, "I am done debating." Number 1. The psychological trap inside every argument you feel compelled to win. Nobody argues because they want to lose. That seems obvious, but there is a less obvious thing hiding inside the desire to win. Most people do not argue because they want the other person to understand the truth. They argue because they want to feel like the person who knows the truth. Those are 2 completely different motivations producing the same behavior and generating 2 completely different outcomes. The person arguing for understanding stops when they have communicated clearly. The person arguing to feel superior cannot stop because the feeling requires the other person to concede, and the other person is not going to concede. So the argument continues, And the longer it continues, the more invested both sides become in their positions. And the more invested they become, the less likely either of them is to actually hear anything the other says. You are now in a loop. Both people talking, neither person listening. Both people increasingly convinced they are right. Both people increasingly frustrated that the other cannot see it. Both people leaving the conversation having learned precisely nothing and having spent genuine, irreplaceable time and energy producing nothing except mutual reinforcement of the positions they walked in with. This is the trap, and the entry point to the trap is the feeling of being right. That feeling is seductive. It is warm and righteous and deeply satisfying for approximately 90 seconds before it becomes the engine of a conflict that produces nothing. Robert Cialdini, the psychologist who wrote the foundational work on influence and persuasion, spent decades studying how people actually change their minds. His finding was not that people change their minds when presented with better evidence. People change their minds when they feel safe enough to change their minds, when the social cost of being wrong is low enough that admitting it does not threaten their sense of self, when the person trying to change their mind is not their opponent but their ally. The argument makes you their opponent. The moment you become their opponent, the part of the brain responsible for rational evaluation shuts down, and the part responsible for survival takes over. You are no longer exchanging ideas. You are engaged in a dominance contest, dressed in the costume of an intellectual discussion. And dominance contests are not won with logic. They are won with status, volume, and persistence, all of which are resources that the unreasonable person is usually better stocked with than you are. Epictetus wrote, "It is impossible to begin to learn that which one thinks one already knows." The person who is most confident in the wrongness they are presenting to you has already decided they know. They are not in the conversation to learn, they are in it to confirm. And every piece of evidence you present, no matter how clear, no matter how solid, is being processed not as information, but as something to be defeated. Because in the context of their psychological state, it is not information. It is a threat. Understanding this changes everything about how you navigate conflict. If you cannot reach someone with logic because the psychological conditions for receiving logic are not present, the intelligent question is not how do I make a better argument? It is how do I change the conditions? Or more powerfully, do I need to change the conditions at all? Or is there a path to the outcome I actually want that does not run through this person's agreement with me? Most of the time that path exists. Most of the time the outcome you actually want, the project completed, the relationship preserved, the decision made in your favor, the situation resolved, can be reached without the other person ever conceding the argument. Because the argument was never the point. It was the obstacle someone placed between you and the point. The intelligent person does not engage with the obstacle. They go around it. They look at the terrain, find the path that does not require a direct confrontation, and take it while the person who placed the obstacle is still standing next to it, waiting for a fight that never arrives. Viktor Frankl wrote from the experience of surviving conditions that stripped everything else away. Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. The attitude you choose in a conflict determines the outcome more than any argument you could construct. Choose the attitude of someone who already knows they are going to win without this fight, and then act from that knowledge. The fight becomes unnecessary. The win becomes inevitable. Walk away from the trap before it closes. Not because you could not have won, because winning inside the trap costs more than winning outside it was ever going to. Number 2, the art of letting people be wrong and watching what that does to them. There is a particular kind of power in letting someone be wrong in front of you and not correcting them. Not a cruel power, not the power of superiority or contempt. The power of someone who has genuinely freed themselves from the compulsion to manage other people's relationship with reality. Someone who has understood that the world does not actually require their correction to keep turning. That most incorrect things correct themselves eventually through the far more persuasive mechanism of consequences. The person who insists on doing the thing that will not work will eventually discover, through the experience of it not working, that it does not work. No argument required. Reality delivers the verdict more efficiently and more convincingly than you ever could, and crucially, without the resentment that your argument would have generated. Nobody resents reality for being right. They frequently resent the person who told them it would be. This is not a passive strategy. It requires genuine internal discipline to execute, because the impulse to correct, to intervene, to prevent the predictable mistake is strong, especially when you can see the mistake coming and you care about the person making it. Letting them make it feels like complicity, like you are watching someone walk into a glass door and choosing not to say anything. But consider the alternative. You say something, they dismiss it. You say it again with more evidence, they become defensive. Now they are committed to proving you wrong by demonstrating that the thing you said would not work does work. They are no longer making the decision based on what is best for them. They are making it based on what proves you wrong. You have taken a situation where someone was about to learn something and turned it into a situation where the lesson is now actively being resisted on your behalf. Lao Tzu wrote in the Tao Te Ching, "The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. The wisdom that can be argued into someone is not the wisdom that changes them. Real wisdom is lived. It arrives through experience. It cannot be transferred through conversation, no matter how excellent the conversation is." The Japanese have a concept called ma. It translates roughly as the space between. The pause, the gap, the emptiness that gives meaning to what surrounds it. In conflict, ma is the space you create by not responding, by not filling every silence with your correction, by allowing the gap to exist and watching what moves into it. What moves into it is usually the truth, not because truth is magnetic in a mystical sense, but because in the absence of the defensive reaction your argument would have triggered, the person is left alone with the situation, with the evidence their own experience is generating, with the growing, uncomfortable, entirely internal realization that maybe the thing they were so confident about is not producing what they expected it to produce. That realization, arrived at from inside, is permanent. It changes behavior. It adjusts the belief. It does what no argument from outside was ever equipped to do. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his private journals, "If someone is able to show me that what I think or do is not right, I will happily change." He was not describing the experience of being argued into a position. He was describing the experience of being genuinely shown. There is a difference. Being argued at generates resistance. Being shown something generates revelation. Your job is not to argue. Your job, if you have one at all in this situation, is to create the conditions in which showing becomes possible, which usually means getting out of the way and letting the situation show it instead of trying to show it yourself. Let them be wrong, with the full, calm, deeply grounded understanding that being wrong is not a permanent condition and that the correction is already on its way from a direction they cannot argue with. Your job is to be there when it arrives, not to have predicted it loudly in advance, not to say "I told you so" when it does, just to be there, steady, without resentment, ready to move forward from whatever the situation has just taught them. That posture, patient and non-reactive and genuinely free from the need to be acknowledged as right, is the most sophisticated social intelligence available, and it is completely invisible to the person it is being exercised on, which is exactly why it works. Number 3. How to disarm anyone in under 30 seconds without saying a single clever thing. Forget the perfect comeback. Forget the devastating logical counter. Forget the brilliantly constructed rebuttal you rehearsed in the shower that would have ended the conversation definitively if you had only thought of it at the time instead of 3 hours later. None of that is what actually disarms people. What actually disarms people is the last thing they expected from you. And the last thing anyone expects when they come loaded for conflict is to be genuinely, unhurriedly, completely heard, not agreed with, not validated in every detail, heard. The experience of having someone look at you with their full attention and actually receive what you are saying without immediately assembling their counter-argument while you speak. That experience is so rare in human interaction that it registers as almost physiologically disarming. The aggression has nowhere to go. The armor was built for a fight, and there is no fight. Dale Carnegie observed something in his decades of studying human behavior that sounds absurdly simple and turns out to be almost universally ignored. You can make more friends in 2 months by being genuinely interested in other people than you can in 2 years by trying to get other people interested in you. Apply this to conflict. You can disarm more opponents in 2 minutes by being genuinely curious about their position than you can in 2 hours by trying to demolish it. The question is the weapon, not the statement, not the evidence, the question. When someone presents you with a position you disagree with strongly, instead of presenting your counterposition, ask a genuine question about theirs. Not a rhetorical question designed to expose the flaw, a real question. What made you think about it that way? How long have you held that view? Has anything ever made you reconsider it? What would need to be true for you to see it differently? Watch what happens. The person who arrived expecting resistance encounters curiosity instead. The defensive system built for an argument does not know what to do with genuine interest. The walls come down not because you pushed them down, but because there was nothing to push against, and walls built for pushing have no mechanism for staying up in the absence of pressure. And in the conversation that follows, the honest, curious one rather than the strategic, combative one, you learn something. Maybe you learn that their position has more nuance than the version they led with. Maybe you learn that there is an emotional underpinning to the intellectual position that makes the logic irrelevant because the logic was never really what this was about. Maybe you learn that they are actually open to a different view, but only if they arrive at it themselves through a conversation that felt safe enough to explore in. Socrates built an entire philosophy on this. He called it the elenctic method. He did not argue. He asked. He asked questions so precise and so genuine that the person answering them eventually reasoned their way to the truth themselves. He was not the source of the insight. He was the conditions in which the insight became possible, and the insight that a person arrives at through their own reasoning is infinitely more durable than the one that was argued into them from outside. Zhuangzi, the Chinese philosopher, wrote, "The fish trap is there because of the fish. Once you have caught the fish, you can forget the trap. Words are there because of meaning. Once you have grasped the meaning, you can forget the words. The question is the trap. The understanding is the fish. Once the understanding exists, you can forget the question, but you cannot get the fish without the trap, and you cannot get the understanding without the question. Ask better questions. Ask them with genuine curiosity and no agenda except understanding, and watch how much further that gets you than the best argument you have ever constructed. The argument positions you as an adversary. The question positions you as an ally. And people open to allies in ways they never open to adversaries, not because they are strategically calculated to do so, but because the human need to be understood is so fundamental and so rarely met that when someone actually meets it, even for a moment, the response is almost involuntary. You will not win every conversation this way. Some people are beyond the reach of curiosity because they did not come for connection. They came for a target. But most people, even the ones who arrive loud and certain and loaded for conflict, have a version of themselves underneath the certainty that is still capable of a real conversation if the conditions for one are created. Your job is to create those conditions, not with argument, with attention. Number 4. The invisible scoreboard that stupid people are always losing and never know it. Every conflict that you choose not to have is being recorded somewhere, not by anyone else, by you. In the accumulation of days where you redirected the energy that would have gone into a pointless fight towards something that actually built your life. In the compounding of hours that other people spent arguing while you spent them making progress. In the growing and undeniable gap between where you are and where the people who prioritize conflict over construction are. There is an invisible scoreboard. Most people in your life are on it without knowing it exists. And the people who argue the most are almost always losing on it by the widest margin, not because arguing makes them stupider, but because it makes them slower. Every hour in conflict is an hour not building, and building compounds. Conflict does not. Think about the most accomplished people you admire, not the loudest ones, not the ones with the strongest opinions on social media, the ones who are genuinely building something real, who are producing work that lasts, who are constructing lives that other people look at and feel the particular kind of awe that comes from seeing someone operating at the level they always told themselves was possible if they just had the right circumstances. Those people are not winning arguments. They are not even having most of the arguments being had around them. They are somewhere else entirely, physically present but mentally in a completely different game. A game with different rules and different stakes, and a different definition of success that makes winning a debate feel about as satisfying as winning a race nobody else knew they were running. Sun Tzu wrote, "Opportunities multiply as they are seized." The opportunity that is seized while someone else is arguing is the opportunity that compounds while they are still talking. The person who seized it is now 2 steps ahead. And 2 steps ahead in the early stages of any worthwhile pursuit is not a small thing. It is the beginning of the gap that eventually becomes unbridgeable. The invisible scoreboard measures several things simultaneously. It measures what you built while others argued, what you learned while others insisted they already knew, what you preserved, your energy, your relationships, your reputation for being the person who does not get drawn into petty conflict, while others spent those resources on battles that produced nothing. What you attracted, better opportunities, better people, better circumstances, by being the kind of person who moves forward rather than sideways into conflict. And it measures something subtler than all of those things. It measures your relationship with your own mind. The person who consistently chooses building over arguing develops a quality of focus that the person who engages with every provocation cannot access. Because focus is not just a practice, it is a state that requires protection. Every time you allow your attention to be hijacked by a conflict you did not need to have, you are not just losing time, you are disrupting a state that took time and effort to build, and that will take time and effort to rebuild. Miyamoto Musashi, the Japanese swordsman and philosopher who never lost a duel in over 60 fights, wrote in the Book of 5 Rings, "Do not engage in useless activity. Everything he did was evaluated against that standard. Is this useful? Does this move the goal forward? Does this serve the outcome I am working toward? If the answer was no, he did not do it. The duel he did not fight was not a loss. It was a resource preserved for a duel that mattered. Apply this standard to every argument you are invited into. Is this useful? Does engaging with this move anything I care about forward? Does spending my energy here serve any outcome I am actually working toward? If the answer is no, you have your answer about whether to engage, and the answer is almost always no. The scoreboard is running. It runs whether you are watching it or not. Every day you choose building over arguing adds to your score in a way that is invisible in the short term and unmistakable in the long one. Every day you choose the argument adds to someone else's lead in a race they do not even know you are running. Run your race. Let them have their argument. The gap between you and the people who prioritize conflict over construction will speak for itself eventually, and it will say everything you never needed to say in any argument you ever chose not to have. Number 5. The final move. Become the person the argument was never built to handle. Every argument has an assumed opponent. When someone prepares to fight you, they build their strategy around the version of you they know, the version that gets defensive, the version that needs to be right, the version that responds to provocation with counter-provocation, and to volume with volume, and to persistence with persistence. They have encountered that version before. They know how it behaves. They know which buttons produce which results. They have a playbook. Become someone their playbook was not written for, not overnight, not through a single decision or a single conversation or a single application of any technique in this video, through the slow, consistent daily practice of being someone different from the person who could be baited into the arguments of the past, through the genuine internal transformation that comes from repeatedly choosing differently until the choice becomes the character and the character becomes the person, and the person is simply someone who does not fight in the ways they used to fight because they are not who they used to be. This is the deepest strategy in this video, and the one that most people will understand intellectually and find most difficult to actually execute, because it is not a tactic. It cannot be deployed in a single moment. It is the result of a long internal project that most people never start, because the payoff is not immediately visible and the cost is immediately present. The cost is every moment when you could have argued and chose not to. Every moment when the old response was available and you did not take it. Every moment of sitting with the discomfort of not defending yourself when every instinct said defend. Those moments are uncomfortable, and they are the building blocks of someone that no argument was designed to engage. Nietzsche wrote, "The higher we soar, the smaller we appear to those who cannot fly." The person who has genuinely outgrown the need to win arguments does not appear to have won anything from the perspective of the people still fighting on the ground. They appear to have given up, to have gotten soft, to have lost the fire they used to have. What they have actually done is redirect that fire from burning everything around them to powering something that moves. There is a concept in martial arts called mushin. It translates as no mind, the state of a practitioner so deeply trained that they no longer think about their responses. They simply respond correctly, without the delay of conscious deliberation, without the interference of ego or fear, or the need to perform for an audience. They are just present in the situation and moving through it with the full accumulated intelligence of everything they have practiced. The person who has genuinely transformed through the practice of not fighting reaches a version of mushin in conflict. They are not consciously deploying techniques. They are not calculating the optimal response. They are simply present in the situation and finding without particular effort that the response that emerges from them is not the one their opponent expected. Not because they are performing non-engagement, because they have actually changed. The person who would have engaged is gone. The person who is here does not need what the argument was offering. Marcus Aurelius returned to this in his Meditations more than almost any other theme. He wrote it to himself in private because it was something he had to keep practicing. The transformation he was describing is not a switch that gets flipped. It is a direction of travel that has to be recommitted to constantly, every morning, every difficult conversation, every moment when the old self is available and the new one has to be chosen again. He wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." The difficult person in your life is not an obstacle to your development. They are the specific, personal, perfectly calibrated instrument of it. Every time they present you with an opportunity to fight and you choose differently, they have just made you stronger in exactly the way that a weight makes a muscle stronger. They are doing you a service. They have no idea they are performing. Be grateful for them. Not sarcastically, genuinely. Because the people who test your ability to not fight are the people who are building, in you, the capability that the people who never tested you could never have produced. And that capability, the genuine, hard-won, battle-tested ability to stay above the conflict that most people spend their lives inside, is the foundation of everything the best version of your life requires. Become that person. One chose moment at a time, one declined argument at a time, one redirected hour at a time, until the person you have become is someone the argument was never built to handle. And then watch how the arguments stop arriving. Not because the world became less difficult, because you stopped being a productive target for difficulty. And difficulty, like every other force in nature, seeks the path of least resistance. You are no longer the path of least resistance. You are the path that goes nowhere for the people who were counting on your reaction. That is the final move, and it is permanent. Go back to the librarian at the beginning of this video. She did not win the argument. She was not even in the argument. She pointed. She moved on. And at the end of that day she went home, having spent her intelligence on the 1,000 small, genuinely useful things a librarian does, rather than on a debate with a man who arrived already knowing everything he was going to leave believing. That is not defeat. That is the highest form of victory available in that situation. The victory of someone who understood exactly what they were dealing with, made the correct assessment of what engaging would cost and produce, and chose the option that served their life, rather than the one that served the conflict. 5 moves. Know the psychological trap and step around it. Let reality teach what your argument never could. Disarm with curiosity instead of fighting with logic. Understand the invisible scoreboard you are winning while they are distracted. And become someone the argument was never designed to handle. None of these moves require you to be passive. All of them require you to be strategic. There is an enormous difference between someone who does not fight because they have nothing to fight with, and someone who does not fight because they understand that fighting is not where the real game is played. Sun Tzu wrote, "Supreme excellence consists in breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting." The enemy in this video is not the difficult person. The enemy is the pattern of engagement that keeps you in their world instead of your own. Break that pattern without fighting it, by simply consistently, intelligently choosing the direction that the pattern was designed to prevent you from going. The people who tried to drag you down to their level were doing you the greatest favor available. They were showing you exactly which direction is up. Go that direction every single day, without argument, without announcement, without waiting for anyone to acknowledge that you made the smarter choice. The results will do the acknowledging. They always do. If this video changed the way you are going to handle the next difficult person in your life, share it with someone who is currently in the middle of an argument they do not need to be having. And remember, the smartest person in the room is rarely the loudest one. They are the one who already knew how this was going to end and planned accordingly. Be that person.